Great, got it. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Shona Reid. I am coming to you from amazing Kaurna country here in Adelaide. I'm on the board for the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. I'm very honoured to do that as a First Nations woman, and I am very honoured actually to be able to present this amazing session to you all today. So welcome. We are recording this session today. If you would like to not be recorded, please feel free to turn off your camera. We can remove your box. Otherwise, feel free to leave your camera on, and if you could go on mute, that would be amazing so we don't get any background noise while we're talking. But before I go any further, it is really important that I am able to provide an acknowledgement of country today. As I said, I'm meeting on the lands of the Kaurna people today. I'd like to pay my respects to the custodians of which the land I meet on. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners in the country in which you're all on today across this amazing country of ours. There's so many stories and so many amazing communities and cultures that we have. I'd like to pay most humbly my respects to you all and all of you that are joining us today. We have a bit of a presentation to give and also hear from some previous Churchill Fellows today, and we're joined by Michelle Deschong and Robin Forrester today as well, and we'll get to some introductions in a second. And it's an exciting opportunity to talk about this, an amazing initiative, and bring that to you and hopefully spark some passion and interest from you in this space. I have a slideshow up. If you are happy to see that on the screen, let us know if you can't see it, but it should be on your screen right now, and I'll try my best to manage the talking and the PowerPoint maneuvers all in one together. But often I get asked a lot about what is this about? What are we talking about when we talk about the Winston Churchill Trust, and where does I suppose the money come from in terms of funding these amazing opportunities? And if I can give a little bit of a background, I think it comes from, and it is an important question. Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister in Britain for a long time, and in 1955 he was 80. That's when he resigned from his Prime Ministership. He served under 5 monarchs, and he lived through and survived 3 wars. He was a writer, historian, he was a journalist, he was even an adventurer and a painter. So he was a man of many talents, and he also won, I don't know if you knew, the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953. So he is a world-renowned figure, and he has I suppose captured an essence of public service. He's been an inspiration to many people, and he was a historical figure that means a lot to many different people. I can say quite confidently that he wasn't perfect like any of us, and there are some interesting essays sitting on our website, Winston Churchill website, doing a bit of a reflection around Winston Churchill, and particularly some conversations around his perspective on race relations. And so it'd be a great opportunity for you to look on that and we now get to look at those conversations and his time as Prime Minister in contemporary eyes. I think that's an important part to do. So there is an opportunity for you to explore him in that aspect too. I think Uncle Tom Calma has written some things on there, and also a good friend of mine, Lainey Anderson, has almost done some commentary around Winston Churchill and his relationships with people of colour. So I think it's important to recognise that as well. Where this fellowship program, the Memorial Trust, I suppose, came from really was when Winston Churchill passed away. In 1965, there was an announcement of his passing, but simultaneously also an announcement that there was a need to establish, or there was a desire to establish, the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. And that was the money that came from that, there was a big financial drive, a door-to-door collection of money. Over 220,000 Australians participated in collecting money to support the Churchill Memorial Trust, and that occurred on the 28th of February 1965. More than $4 million, £2.2 million back then was raised. And even today, it still remains one of the largest public fundraising efforts in Australian history. So the money that is used in the fellowship program has originated from a community collection, a community drive for raising funds to support, I suppose, the vision that Winston Churchill had around public service and contributing back to community. So it's really quite an interesting fact that it's the only time in Australia's history that banks were opened on a Sunday. I don't know if you knew that, but it's the only time that banks were open on a Sunday, so they could deposit that, that money into a bank. So, I think those interesting facts are something amazing. So Robert Menzies referred to this trust as the People's Trust, and it really has tried to keep true to those sentiments, where it's around every church fellow carries the aspirations of millions of Australians. It looks at past, present and future. We think about the past, those who donated to the trust and provided opportunities through their financial contributions. We think about the present, about those who are able to apply for and participate in the fellowship program. And we think about those that can benefit into the future from those fellows that contribute today, what that means for our community tomorrow. So it really is about, thinking about past, present and future. So if you're thinking about this fellowship, which you clearly are because you're on the line today, if you have a passion for a particular subject, if you have a desire to think about how you can make a difference in your industry and community, the Churchill Fellowships are a real tangible, practical and achievable way of looking at finding those aspirations and achieving those. The Churchill Fellowships are for absolutely all types of people, and it's all types of passion and all the types of things that you're committed to and are passionate about. Churchill Fellowships are really about looking at how can you learn and share your knowledge that you have now, that you collect when you travel overseas, and what you bring back to the community here in South Australia. One of the things that I really love about the Churchill Fellowships is it's not solely for the academic. It is, yes, there's academics that participate in this, but it is a unique and it is a prestigious opportunity open for Australians of all walks of life. You don't have to have an academic degree to participate in this amazing opportunity. And it's not just an overseas trip and an opportunity to travel. It is absolutely about an opportunity for you to broaden your knowledge, to broaden your understanding, to broaden your desire to contribute to your community back home. It doesn't need to comprise of formal research. You can learn and build new skills and build networks and look at your chosen field and how you can enhance that here in Australia, locally, on the ground with your community. The fellowships are amazing. They're 4 to 8 weeks overseas. Sometimes COVID chucks a curveball at us about being able to, how it's panned out over the last few years. But we can talk about that a little bit later on and have some conversations about COVID. But traditionally, it's been a 4 to 8 week time overseas in which you travel around different countries, 2 different countries, to look at your area of passion and to explore and ask questions and get in there and get your hands dirty around what you want to know and what you want to bring back to Australia. Over the years, we've had nearly 4,500 fellows that have been awarded fellowships so far. So that's since 1965, with probably about 100 happening every year here in Australia. And as I said, it truly is a global opportunity. You get to, look at places and spaces that you might not have thought possible before. And the idea is that you make those networks, you build those networks, you bring back those ideas, you bring that innovation, ultimately for the betterment of our community here in Australia, for the area and the passion that you have, and building that into the fabric of our society, really, which is something that's really important. Eligibility is a really important part of this. You've got to be an Australian citizen to do this, and obviously that's a key component. And age 18 years and over, that's an important part by the application's closing date. So if you're 17, that's absolutely okay. Just make sure by the 23rd, 28th of April, I think, you have to be 18 to go overseas, and that's got a lot to do just with the practicalities of travelling in other countries. You need to be able to travel overseas. That is, a really core component of this fellowship. If you do have a disability, that doesn't mean you're out. That just means we need to look at ways that we can support you traveling overseas and accessing the areas and places and spaces that you need to. There is opportunity to access virtual research options, especially with the COVID, if you have a disability as well, or have caring responsibilities. But obviously that's something that will work, important to talk about with the Winston Churchill Trust in that space. But primarily it is important. And the vision of this is to travel overseas and bring that knowledge back from places and spaces beyond our borders. I've worked in remote communities for much of my life, and to see that a fellowship can provide opportunities for people in remote areas to travel and to learn and take back to remote communities is something that is a passion of mine, and I feel really strongly about that. Where you live in Australia shouldn't disadvantage your capacity to participate in a program like this. So the Churchill Fellowship does support the people living in remote areas and actively seeks out opportunities for people to do that. So I would encourage you, if you're from a remote area, to think about that doesn't exclude you or make it any harder. There's lots of support in the Trust to support people from remote areas participating in the fellowships. It is important to think that, to know that the Churchill Fellowship is an individual project. It's not a team-based project, so it is about an individual travelling overseas for an individual's piece of work. It is important to keep that in mind when you do your application, that it is not a group-based project. It is okay. I talked about it not being an academic thing. It is okay to be an academic and still apply for fellowships, but it is important to remember that it is something that doesn't directly form part of your studies. The fellowship is about, you do have the capacity. There is time that needs to be put aside to not only travel, but also to do a report on what you have learned and how you're going to implement that when you get back. So, there is time constraints with this, and there is time, you will need time to do parts of your fellowship. And thinking about that, thinking about the realistic options of that in a work and tertiary perspective is important. Once again, I'm just going to reiterate over and over again, it really isn't, the message to get across that Churchill Fellowships are about people from all walks of life, and what your experience in studies or your experience in work don't have to be necessarily academic. They can be absolutely lived experiences, and it's important that we can add to that in that space. Once again, I'm going to say a little bit more about project eligibility. Your project must be suitable for the fellowship. So, it's got to benefit the community in some way or another, bringing back that knowledge, bringing back ideas, bring back practical skills. Like, it is important that it does do that, that it has a direct application back to community. And as a board member, I'm also on the selection panel. I chair the selection panel here in South Australia. That's what we're looking for in those applications, is how it will translate back to community after you've done your travel. So demonstrating that in your application is a really important part of the application process, but it also gives you a really, I suppose, focus focus when you're overseas around the information you're gathering and the research that you're building and how that actually will help you when you get back to Australia. The project itself must be a self-contained project, so it can't be part of a university degree. It can't be partially funded by another organisation, so it is an entity unto itself. You know, in essence, the Churchill Fellowships isn't a travel budget. It is absolutely a project unto its own and unto itself. And so, thinking about that in your application process, how does it fit into your work? How does it fit into your studies? You know, making that clear. And I know as a selection panelist, we do explore that a little bit if there is some synergies between your studies and your work and the fellowship. It doesn't need to relate to your employment, by the way. So you could be a worker in the mines and then go and study how to make soap. That's fine. So it doesn't have to be linked to your work. This is about you as an individual, not necessarily where you attach yourself in your profession either. We do not, and I can say from the applications that I've read through over the last few years, it absolutely does not. We don't set limits on what topics you should look at. We don't set limits on the matters of interest that you want to explore. In fact, it's more exciting for us that way. We get to see some amazing pieces of work and some very inspirational people looking at some things we've never heard of in our life. And I think that's the beauty of the Churchill Fellowship. You know, fellowships is that, you know, we are so diverse as a peoples, and we have such different passions, and to see that come alive in people's applications is something that we're really excited to see every time we get to read those applications. So please don't feel that you're limited in your topic choice for Churchill Fellowships. Please come to us with obscure, interesting, but most importantly, relevant and topics that can absolutely start, you know, making changes and contributing to our fabric of our society. Really, that's what's passionate, and that's what we get excited about. I think I've been over some of this, so I've no set topics. Obviously, I've done that. Oh gosh, I think I've already done this. Some are location or some applicant specific. So there's a general, so the fellowships themselves, you know, you go through an application process and you are obviously interviewed and those sorts of things. There are fellowships that are sponsored specifically for people, and we're going to talk with, I think, Michelle Deschong a bit later, who had a sponsored fellowship when you went through, Michelle, in 2017. But there are specific fellowships, and you can check them out on the Winston Churchill Trust site, I believe. Adam, I think I'm correct in saying that might be applicable to you, where people have generously donated some funds for people to focus on a particular area of passion. I know in South Australia here, we have the Maggie Beer Fellowship here that looks at the food industry. So it's, you know, there are different industries that have sponsored fellowships. So if that's something that appeals to you, feel free to have a look at that on the Winston Churchill site to see if those sponsored fellowships are relevant to you. It's a great opportunity to get those, and you know, we encourage people to do that. And obviously, I just think I've already gone through all of this. How will this project benefit your community? And that is something, the last dot point that I'm really looking for when I do my selection panels, is to look at absolutely how will this piece of work contribute back to our community when you come home and for the years beyond. Applications close 28th of April, 23rd was wrong, 28th of April this year. So there's a few weeks to go, just over a month to go. We are taking applications online. Please feel comfortable about that. It is a great and easy way to apply for applications online. You can save, so you can go halfway through, save it, and then come back to it at a later stage. But it's important not to forget to come back to it, because often people apply and then they go away and save it, and then they come back on the 29th of April to fill it out and realise that it's shut. So, you know, think about collecting all the information and doing it, getting online and doing it. put it in a Word document first and then come over, like whatever works for you. People have different ways, but it is an online application. It is an easy process, but it's important to have those really fundamental understandings and focuses that you have about what your piece of work is about, what you want to research, where you want to go, and how is it going to contribute back to your community. They're really key points that we're looking for in the application process. Everything that you need to know about applying for the fellowships absolutely sits completely on the Trust's website. You do need a couple of referees to help you through this. So it's just like any other application process. We want to check out, and we want to get the references up. A couple of people who can vouch for you. One is a personal characteristic, a character reference. The other is probably from someone who has authority on your topic. So somebody who knows a little bit about your area, that's passionate to them as well. So that's a really important part of that, is that we can have a look at what people who are getting behind you and supporting you for the fellowships as well. So I think, it is a fully automated process. If you register, you can get your details, you get your login, all that information sits on the website, and I encourage you to get on there and have a bit of a look. Most importantly, don't leave it to the last minute, because rushed applications often are not the best applications. So think about getting on early, think about planning your answers and your responses, getting your referees together. Don't rush it in the last minute. One, it's too stressful. Two, you probably don't get the best out of you that we can possibly get, and the information we need to during that process, if you're doing it in the last hour or two of applications being opened. When you're traveling overseas, think about, as part of your application, that your itinerary to destinations, think about where you're going and its benefit to you and benefit to this piece of work. Not, shoving in too much travel, overcrowding your itinerary. That's that can take a toll on you, just on your travel arrangements. And if we can't have you well in the process, then the research and what you're trying to achieve won't come out the best either. So thinking about your itinerary and what you're planning, think about places of relevance, and making sure that you have enough time to process information and I suppose record that information in a way that's best for you. So think about your itinerary and not overburdening yourself in this process. It's important to put forward some of them a complete itinerary as a panelist, and looking at the applications. We like to get a really good sense of where you're going and kind of getting understanding why you're choosing to go there versus other places. So it's important you can give us the most comprehensive itinerary you can in your application process, and even thinking about going there, what are you going to do when you get there? Are you going to have a few meetings? Are you going to a conference? Are you doing some observations? Are you interviewing people? I think they're really important pieces of information that we like to see as a selection panel in this space. I think the other bit that's really important is, if you can be as specific as you can about around the information, even costings is helpful. The Churchill Trust will do the costings for you in your itinerary once it's approved. But the more detailed you get, it means they can give a more accurate, I suppose, costing to that process, which means it's less bumps in the road for those fellows that get approved into the future. So that really helps the process and the smoothness of it all. COVID is obviously, and our borders shutting down and our capacity to travel has had a major impact on the Churchill program. We still have a fair few fellows from 2021. Is that correct, Adam? I think 2021.
2019 and 2020.
2019 and 2020.
200 people.
200 people has still yet to move over and to see the world. But slowly but surely, people are getting out into the world and are being able to finish off or to start their fellowship, which is amazing. And we're feeling really positive that by early 2023, the world itself would have started to sort itself out with regards to travel and travelling differently and travelling safer. So we are obviously working closely with the people that we need to enable that to happen. And, you know, think about, it's important we also think about, you know, our own safety in that space and take account into our itinerary and where we think are best places for us to go in the current situation as well. Things like, you know, things I need to think about, just a few things like vaccinations, quarantine periods, like that. I know they sound really practical, but they're the things that we need to think about when you're only going for 4 to 6 weeks overseas. You know, you go to different countries and quarantining for different times. It's important that we understand those requirements so you can make best use of your time over there rather than best use of a hotel room while you're over there. So, you know, they're practical, but really important. Even down to, do you need police checks to go into different places and spaces as well? Understanding those practicalities are a really important part of the fellowship as you go forward. As I said, I sit on a selection process. I chair the South Australian panel here, and we have committees that sit within our selection panels that have people with expertise in different areas. So, you know, applications obviously filled out online and they come to the trust to kind of be filtered and shortlisted. And we look at many factors when we're looking at assessing applications. We do the assessment and we kind of pull them down to key areas and you know, looking at people's, there's so many applications and we always feel torn about how many people we can interview, but we interview just a handful, you know, a few, more than a handful, 2 handfuls, 3 handfuls of people. So it is a long process, a little bit, to interview those that have put in some really quality applications. And that's why applications are so important, because that's all we've got to go on until we get to meet with you face to face in an interview. And that we'll able to then, you know, sometimes we can meet with you face to face, sometimes we'll have to do a video, but we will make it work no matter what. We're all, you know, Zoomed savvy now, I understand, from the COVID world. So we will make things happen the best way we can. You know, and especially for people in rural and remote areas, we understand it's harder to get into metropolitan areas. So they're the sorts of things that we will make sure it happens. So don't feel you're excluded or disadvantaged because of where you live. Absolutely apply, and we can put you through the process. We almost about half of those that we interviewed are likely to get a fellowship, so they're pretty good odds. So if you've made it to the interview stage, it means you've got a real quality application, and we really are interested in getting behind you and finding a way to make it happen. And the interviews are not meant to be scary, they're not meant to be intimidating, but they are about giving an opportunity to hear what you have to say with your own voice, and letting you do the talking rather than us do the reading, because when we're reading, we're interpreting with our lens and we'd rather you tell your story. So that's why the interviews are there, so you can tell your version around, you know, and get your message across about what the fellowship means for you and how you want to run that when you go overseas. And I think that's a really important part. And I think my most favourite part of the process is hearing from people from their own mouths and from their own lens around what they want to do with these fellowships. Once we do the interviews, we did then make an assessment around, you know, who we would like to recommend for fellowships. And, you know, that's something that each state will do. So each state has a selection panel, and we will do this, you know, we'll make some recommendations to the national board. And the board makes the final decision on who goes forward and who's offered those fellowships. They're not, you know, obviously they're based on recommendations from the state, but there are a lot of considerations to take into play around that, especially, you know, each state has, you know, lots of different perspectives to look from. And so it's a great opportunity for us as a board to look at all the different interest areas across the country. We're often asked some tips in the application process, and I suppose the best tip that I can give you, or the team can give you, is to make sure that you read thoroughly and address all the selection criteria. So it's one of those things where it's a very, you know, arduous task of sitting down and tick boxing, I suppose. Have you answered this question? Have you answered that question? Have you covered off on that area and that criteria? That's probably the best tip, because, you know, for us, you know, there's so many applications, and if there are core pieces of information missing, then, you know, we will have to put that application aside, unfortunately. So do read through, do look at the criteria, make sure you do that. The other bit is don't use a lot of jargon, because we don't understand, I suppose. Your passion area might be familiar to you. Acronyms might be familiar to you, but as a selection panel, we won't know some of that. So we're making an assessment of the information that you provide us. So acronyms and jargon, try not to put that in there. Try and put it in plain English, you know, because as a selection panel, it's really important for us to be able to understand what you're saying. If we don't understand it, we can't interpret it properly, and we probably won't value your applications as much as it should be. So that would be, you know, the other big tip from someone who's been on the selection side. The other bit is don't waffle. Keep it clear, keep it succinct, and waffling often, you know, we've got hundreds of applications to read, hundreds and hundreds of applications to read. The more succinct, the more clear, the higher it is, I suppose, on that paperwork there. We're able to, I suppose, remember that better. We're able to understand what you're saying a bit easier. So, you know, being clear, succinct, less jargon, make sure you do the criteria and read your criteria. They're the tips I would say are really important in getting a successful application up and through. Just so you know, it is a competitive process. There are, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications that come in. And as I said, there's only about 100 overall nationally that given out every year. So it is a highly competitive process. But this is not a reason for you to be shy. It's a reason for you to shine, if I'm going to say. So, you know, this is a passion. This is why we're running this focus sessions for First Nations people. Is, you know, one of the reason I took the opportunity up to sit on the board and to chair South Australian Selection Committee is for more First Nations peoples to participate and take advantage of this, because we have so much passion and we contribute so much to our community already that these sorts of fellowships are amazing for that. So this is an opportunity for you to shine and show us your passion and how you'd like to go overseas and bring that back here to Australia. There is, you know, obviously here tonight we have, the other bit is make your application stand out. So I think, you know, use your skills and your storytelling skills to get that across. You know, those applications that the selection panel remembers the most are often those applications that get up at the end of the day. So make it stand out, make it something that's you know, people remember, so we can start going, you know, talk about in our downtime, we talk about how marvelous you are and your application is. Again, if you have any questions, the other thing don't be shy about is that there's an office in Canberra, Winston Churchill Memorial Trust office in Canberra, there for you to call at any time or email at any time to answer questions up until the 28th. Anyway, or on the 28th even, but don't do late applications, it doesn't work. You know, give them a call, you know, they're really nice people, believe it or not, and they would love to have a chat with you about your application and any questions that you may have, or any handy tips that might be able to give you. Definitely give them a call. They're there to help at the end of the day. I think I'm getting here. We're nearly at my end of the PowerPoint, and I'm not sure how much, I don't know how many are left actually. I've got a few, I think I'm on the last slide. I think the other part of this is, you know, tell us about, you know, often we ask the question when we're doing the selections, why would we back this person or why would we back this fellowship? I think it's a great opportunity for you not to hide from that. Often people feel quite embarrassed about talking about themselves or talking about, you know, what they want to do when they come back or their aspirations for the future. Don't shy away from that. Don't convince us that you're the right person to undertake this piece of work. Tell us how you're able to, and you're the best placed person when you come back to make change and influence others. You know, it is such an important opportunity, and so many people have benefited from these fellowships that it is worth fighting for. You know, this is a great opportunity for you. So sell us not just your itinerary and your passion and your purpose, but also tell us about you and share with us, you know, the investment in you and how you're going to take this out into the future and what you're going to do with it. That's, you know, that's a really important part of the gig here, is to give the fellowship not just to the topic, but to the people who want to go over as well. I think I've come to the end of my PowerPoint show. I think that's it, Adam. Have I missed Adam Davey online, everyone? Adam is the CEO, and I'm really sorry, I forgot to introduce you, Adam. Adam is the CEO.
No,
you're the CEO at the Winston Churchill Trust. Did I miss anything that's important in that presentation?
You were extremely thorough. I think you covered everything. And then
did
some.
I? It's
Thank
killing me. I need a drink. And I am going to have a drink, but I'm going to take this. What I am going to try and do is, here we go, stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other in the room. Feel free, if you want to take your cameras off, we can see each other. We have some amazing people with us today, and while I'm going to have a drink, I'm going to throw over. We have 2017 recipient of the James Love Churchill Fellowship. We have Michelle Deschamps online. Hi, Michelle. I like people to tell their own story about who they're from and where they're from. It's always nicer to hear it from the person themselves. Michelle, are you able to give us a little intro about who you are, where you're from, and the fellowship, and why people should, get on board with the fellowships?
Sure. Good evening, everybody, and thanks very much for joining. If you are okay, I wouldn't mind seeing everybody's faces just to say hi and see if there's anybody familiar to me. But as mentioned early on, I'm a 2017 fellow, and in particular, one of the things that's really important, of course, was to acknowledge the Indigenous cultures around the world and how my fellowship might work with them. So in keeping with that, I want to also acknowledge the lands on which you're all joining today, and pay my respects to those that have gone before us, and in particular, those people who were influential in the establishment of the Churchill Fellowship, but importantly, some of our mob that have taken up the opportunity to do that. So I guess a couple of things about me. Some of you may know me, some of you may not, but I'd say if there's 4 things I'm passionate about, first and foremost is issues of gender equality, issues of leadership, governance, and politics. So I'm a political scientist. I think that the politics in all aspects of our lives has had a huge influence. And so for me, some of the areas that I put into my Churchill application were particularly founded on some of those principles. In 2017, you can imagine that at that point in time, the Uluru Statement had come out a few months before, and there was lots of discussions about what voice treaty truth might mean for our mob. I'd also taken over the helm of the Australian Indigenous Governance Institute, and we were talking about ways that we would build on the capacity of First Nations people and their insights into leadership and governance, and how some of that might have practical application here. So as much as Shona covered off pretty much everything I could possibly think of in terms of what you need to do for the program, but particularly that conversation around what's the benefit back in Australia? What are you motivated to do? And to design your Churchill around some of those things really helps with what the next 2 or 3 years can look like when you come back. So as much as it doesn't have to be attached to work, for me, it definitely aligned and really fitted some of my passion in a whole range of different areas. So came at a time when it was quite beneficial. I'm going to assume that people have the option to go and read the report, so I won't go into too much of that. But basically, what I wanted to do was have a look at the way that First Nations people were leading and governing in their own affairs, in alignment with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And for that reason, I wanted to go to Canada, US, and New Zealand, obviously because of some of the like-minded social circumstances, but also some of the disparities between things like treaties, the application of treaties for First Nations people. So I started off in New Zealand and went to the Māori Indigenous Governance Centre at the University of Waikato, building on some of the relationships that I'd previously had with people through both the leadership work through the AILC and the Governance Institute. And really it was an opportunity to speak with Maori faculty and researchers and people who were lawyers in the Maori lands courts around the application of treaty provisions for their people, and spoke with a number of different Maori women around the work that they were doing around leadership and representing across government, community sectors, and some of the more social challenges that were existing. Some of you might remember some of the contested spaces with Air New Zealand and it wanting to use native kind of imagery on its airlines, but wouldn't actually employ Maori people who had very visible tattoos and mokos. So they're kind of the contradictions of some of that stuff, and listening to the stories of some of the women that were involved in contesting that campaign. I then went on to the United States and to the University of Arizona, where I worked with the First Nations Governance Institute there. And again, building on some of the work that was also happening around Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous governance. And I think that that's a really pertinent thing that's still, very high on our agenda around the way that the data about us is used by others and how we protect and implement our own governance structures to make sure that our mob stories and our intellectual property and our data is being used by us for the purposes to support us. And then finally over to the University of Victoria. And that was really interesting for me because I'd been to Vancouver and Toronto previously, but going over to the University of Victoria, where they had established a very specific Indigenous program that looked at some of those contemporary issues, was quite insightful for me. And, collectively, all of these things created a really good story around what was important in changing the narrative for Indigenous Australians, essentially. And many moons ago, when I was one of the board members of the Australian Indigenous Leadership Centre, we'd had a presentation from the Banff Institute. So it was nice to be able to go over there and look at their holistic approach to leadership and governance development. So the other thing that I tried to do as part of this is to not just have it as a one-way exchange, so really building on the capacity to align particular opportunities for me to speak on the Australian experience. So in New Zealand, I got to present to the Maori faculty and researchers. In the Native Nations Institute in Arizona, I gave a keynote address on Indigenous data governance. And then at the University of Victoria, I gave a seminar as part of the One Wave Festival. So some of that took a little bit of time, but I felt that it was really important for other people to also hear from me about what was happening in our country and how some of those stories were just as important to share. I think I might leave it there, but I guess we'll probably come back to just say if there's any tips or ideas about how to make a really incredible application. And we might do that towards the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, no, it is get onto that report if you can. It's a great read and a great opportunity to, learn some things that you might not have known before. We've also got Robin Forster online. Robin, oh, you're off mute already. Awesome. Robin, likewise, thank you for joining us. A 2012 fellow. That's a few years ago now. But Robin, are you able to just give a bit of spiel about who you are, where you're from, and a bit about your fellowship and the topic that you explored?
Yep. Okay. Thanks very much, Shona. So I'm coming to you today from the nation's capital, Ngunnawal country. I'm a Yui Australian South Sea Island woman who grew up between Bundaberg and the Sunshine Coast and have accidentally lived on Ngunnawal country now for 37 years. How that happened, anybody that's come to Canberra will know that that happened quite often. Yes, 10 years since I did my fellowship. So, for me, it has been a really interesting experience and opportunity. I will say that I first started looking at Churchill Trust fellowships in around 1980. So it took me a while before I actually I don't know whether I'd say had the courage, because people who know me know that I'm pretty courageous, but had what I consider to be the right topic. In the 80s, I was very much immersed in the performing arts world, and I was looking at what people were doing in that space. Then as we moved into the 90s and 2000s, I sort of got into that education and employment field and started, looking at what could be opportunities there. Every year going back, seeing what people were doing. And then in 2010, I joined the Australian Federal Police as the head of their diversity team. And when I got into that space, I started thinking about what was it that we needed to do to be able to support not only Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander law enforcement officers, but also people from diverse linguistic, backgrounds, and also women, and looking at what we weren't doing in Australia that was happening overseas. The first thing I did was I went onto the Churchill website and I put in the keywords: Indigenous, policing, First Nations, all sorts of things like that. And a couple of reports jumped up, a couple of fellows. I think all up at that time, there might have been about 9 or 12, between 9 and 12 people who had specifically gone on their fellowship to look at policing. But the thing that struck me about those people, that of all of them, only 3 of them were other Aboriginal people. The other people that had gone and researched that were non-Indigenous. They were either uniform or non-uniform law enforcement officers in our various jurisdictional police services. There was only 3 that were Indigenous. And I thought this could be a really good opportunity to actually look at something that's probably going to have a lot more meaning to me and my mob, because it's something that, as we know, when mob does something about mob, it makes a lot more sense. It's something good for us to do. In 2010, I also had the opportunity to go to my first International Women in Policing conference in the US. And whilst I was at that conference, I met a whole range of fantastic First Nations people from around the US, uniform, non-uniform. There was one person there who was also on a Churchill Fellowship, non-Indigenous, doing looking at policing. And I thought to myself, okay, I really need to do something about, looking at this topic. So in 2012, I decided that I would put an application in to basically look at peer support and mentoring networks for law enforcement officers from diverse backgrounds. I chose, like Michelle, to go to Canada, to the US, and also to New Zealand. But I also decided to go to the UK as well, because there was lots of things happening in the UK. I had the opportunity to again attend that International Women in Policing conference, this time in Newfoundland in Canada. I also had the opportunity to again attend the law enforcement officers conference in Las Vegas, which was First Nations mob. And I also had the opportunity to hook up and link up with lots of law enforcement people from right around, the US. Whilst I was at the International Women in Policing conference, because we're all great talkers, we talk to people. One of my great contacts was the actual chaplain for the International Women in Policing, who was with the Las Vegas PD. She had said to a couple of people, my friend Robin is here from Australia. She's doing this research. I've seen her program. She doesn't have that. She's coming to you. Do you reckon you can host her? So an important thing about this is the contacts that you make beforehand and the contacts that you make when you first arrive to be able to open doors for you. Now, you would think I'm working in the, federal policing agency, so I should be able to get in lots of doors. I should be able to get lots of opportunities. But I was having difficulty getting into places like the Secret Service and the FBI in Washington. By going to that conference, a lot of doors opened, and I managed to add on, while I was there, additional meetings to be able to talk to people about what was happening in their diversity spaces, what was happening in their EEO spaces. It also meant that when I hit the UK, I got a phone call from the Scottish Police Service, from the women that I'd met in Canada, who said, we've got our British Women in Policing Conference. Would you like to come along, have a chat, do a presentation, meet some other women? We may not all be Indigenous or First Nations, but we've got a really big interest in what you're doing and how we can contribute to that going forward. So I had this great opportunity to be able to meet lots of people, to make lots of networks, to do lots of research, to attend originally 1, 2, and then 3 conferences, where again, I made a whole lot of other networks. Here we are 10 years later, it's the 10th anniversary of my Churchill this year. And many of those people, particularly a number of those, Black American women, those First Nation women, I'm still in regular contact with. And to this day, when I travel overseas, if we remember what traveling overseas was, Michelle and I are both anxious, but if we remember what traveling overseas was, whenever I go somewhere, I always have people to catch up with. We continue the conversations that we had. It allowed me to bring my learnings back to Australia. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was to develop a law enforcement association for our First Nations mob here in Australia. I went to New Zealand last, and going to New Zealand last had me go, actually, it's something that we need to do more collaboratively between the two of us. Yes, we don't have that association happening now, but we do have that contact and that network happening with law enforcement mob from New Zealand, happening with law enforcement mob in Australia. The other thing that I think has been great since I did my Churchill is now I'm actually seeing more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people taking up the opportunity to do a Churchill, but also in that law enforcement space. So a couple of years, I think it was 2 years after I came back from my Churchill, one of my colleagues, Dean Sadler, who's a federal agent with the Australian Federal Police, was successful in gaining a fellowship and went and looked at a whole range of different things in the US and Canada and New Zealand as well. So there's those opportunities around. Now, Shona spoke about support, and support from the trust is really important. For me, it was a particularly important. Yes, we look at a program that's 4 to 8 weeks. I actually stretched my initial stretch out was 3 months. I'd worked a whole lot of things so that I could get the best value for the trip and for what I wanted to do. And I got really great support from my employer. I was lucky. People don't always get good support. I initially thought, yep, if I'm going to go for 3 months, they're going to make me take long service leave. The AFP were brilliant. They said I could go on leave with pay. So I didn't have to access any leave. And I know that's a really unusual thing. People don't always get that opportunity. But I'd been away for nearly 8 to 9 weeks. I headed across to the UK. I was in the UK for a couple of days, and I got that phone call that we all dread getting. In the middle of the night, UK time, I looked at my phone. It was my home ringtone. It was my mother, and I knew then that it was not going to be a nice phone call. And it was my mum ringing me to tell me my dad had passed. So it took me a little while to, process that. I knew that it was possibly something that was going to happen. And my mum had kept saying to me, all the time I was on my travels, every time I'd check in, she'd go, your dad's going good, but I don't know if he's going to be here when you get home. Within a couple of hours, I contacted the office, and they had me on a plane back home within 12 hours. So to the staff at the Churchill Trust, I am forever grateful that they had that they provided that opportunity and they provided that support. The other thing that meant was I hadn't actually quite finished my Churchill because I still had New Zealand to go. They also didn't pressure me to say, okay, get your sorry business done and jump back on the plane. They gave me about 6 months grace, and I came back in and finished it the following year and had that opportunity. So the support that you get from the trust is absolutely fantastic. I know Michelle's talked about tips and hints, and we talk a little bit more about that later, but I just want to add a couple of things as I'm really conscious of time. Is Shona spoke about your project. I've talked to lots of people over the years about the projects, you know, what you're putting together. The most important thing is make sure your title is catchy, because that is what is going to get the eye of a panel at first, is that title. If your title is catchy and it looks good, it's going to make people want to read more. So that's really important. The people that you get for your referees, they're really important as well. Subject matter expert is a must. My subject matter expert referee was not another Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander woman, but was a Māori woman, First Nations woman. For those of us here in Canberra will know Jo Kamira. Jo Kamira is a ex-AFP detective. She did my referee for me because she understood exactly what I was wanting to do. She said to me she wished she'd done it many years earlier. So those sorts of things I think are really important. But yeah, making sure that you know what it is that you want to do, you know how you can get the best impact for that, how you can make the most of every opportunity, you know, how you can go and make all of those strangers around the world your friends. You know, strangers are just the friends we haven't met yet. You know, I've got a network of people all around the world. The opportunities that opened up for me when I came back from my Churchill, absolutely phenomenal. I got back within a couple of months, people were ringing me and offering me positions in other agencies. I managed to go on to get a promotion into the SES, into the ACT government, then left there, and I'm now the CEO of the Australian Indigenous Leadership Centre. But my passion, Michelle talked about what her passion was. My passion is about helping people to be the best people that they can be, to be the people that we were always meant to be. So as you know, my main passion is around coaching. I'm an organisational leadership coach, and that's really what I like to do. I like to work with people. I like to share what I've been given to be able to pay that forward. Hence paying it forward. 10 years since I did my Churchill, Adam rang me earlier in the year and he said, oh, you made a comment about if there was anything we ever needed that you'd always put your hand up, you'd always willing to help. So his question was, would you like to be on the selection panel, the ACT selection panel for the Churchills going forward for the next couple of years? Of course I would. I had that opportunity. It's time now for me to give back. But, you know, Churchill, he had his moments, but he's probably best known for some of the world's best quotes. You know, I'm forever quoting two people, Winston Churchill and Richard Branson. You know, Richard Branson, if somebody, you know, offers you an amazing opportunity, just say yes and work out how to do it later. I live by that. I've been saying yes to lots of things that I've had no idea for the last 50 odd years. I'm 60 in a couple of months, so I've been saying yes constantly. But, you know, I just want to leave you with one of Churchill's probably most famous quotes, and is that we make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. And I think that's really the backbone to what Churchill is all about. We have that opportunity to get as long as we are prepared to give. So thanks, Shona.
Thank you so much, Robert. That was amazing. Michelle.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to jump in on the back of a couple of those comments, particularly around the topic. And as we said, the issue of passion. So for some of us, we're lucky enough to work in places that fulfill that passion, but it's also okay to want something broader and be able to speak to that. And I guess that's the other thing that obviously comes through in your interviews, is that you're passionate about it, that you can speak to this without the notes, that you can convince others that it's something really important and tangible and amazing for them to get on board with. And I think often we probably talk ourselves out of it because we might, you know, Shona made the comment about soap making or stuff like that, and we would go, don't be ridiculous. But the reality is that one of the things as you go through this process and are awarded a Churchill, when you have a look at the depth and breadth of what others in your cohort are doing, you kind of go, wow, I never would have thought about that. Like I had somebody who was going to play at the New York Symphony Orchestra or something like that because they wanted to advance their own musical career, and this was an opportunity to do that. So nothing's off the table. The really important part is being able to put it into a tangible story and show that passion. But the other thing I wanted to talk to is the fact that a lot of blackfellas, we all have this imposter syndrome. As we sit in rooms with others, we're convinced that they're more worthy, that their idea was better than ours, that they won't value our contribution the same. And so I would say to you, for every time that you have that going on in your head, just turn it off. Just take the moments, take the opportunities, because like Robin said, you know, she probably had a look at this 2 or 3 times. Similarly, I did that and realised when the time was right. But taking the leap of faith and giving it a go is really the first step, and making sure that if you don't get it the first time, get the feedback in order to be able to strengthen it and have a go again, because I'm going to assume that there's no, I haven't checked in lately on the rules, but there's nothing stopping you from applying again after each round to better your chances. And just 2 other things I'd say, the referees, absolutely, I support what's been said about that. But the other thing is word them up to respond, because I'd say that the length of my application was really about how long it was taking for my referees to do the work. So make sure that you're kind of flagging that in their diaries now. And the itinerary, like, yeah, we want to fill our 8 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it is. But my other tip would be to make sure you put in some rest days as well, because it can be pretty intense. It's a lot of information. You got to make the notes along the way, process what you're getting. So make sure that you don't kind of overcommit yourself to something, and then the second half of it becomes arduous and burdensome rather than the opportunity you wanted it to be.
If I just add to Michelle's comments about if you miss out the first time, you know, give it a go again. In the ACT cohort, we had, I think it was 8 a year that was successful. There was one lady who on the day at the dinner, when she got up and gave her talk, she said, never give up. She said, this was my 8th time, my 8th go at putting in an application. I knew that I would crack it sooner or later. She did have a musical background, so she was doing something in her musicianship. But we also had another guy that was, you know, got the NRMA fellowship. He was off to do, you know, look at road rules in some obscure countries. We had people doing medical stuff. There was all sorts of things. So, yeah, so, you know, the world is your oyster. There's lots of opportunities. And something that you might think is crazy might end up being something that is worthwhile supporting and backing. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robin and Michelle. That's amazing. And that's why, you know, this stuff is getting on is so important, and people can hear and see why this opportunity is amazing. My favorite quote, Robin, I love it when people throw quote. My favorite quote of Winston Churchill is probably not the most appropriate. It's tell people to go to hell and make them look forward to the journey. So that's my my favorite Winston Churchill. Probably not the most appropriate for this one, but maybe it is. Maybe it's about, you know, just give it a go and keep going and go for it. We have, I just thought, you know, Uncle Tom has jumped online. Uncle Tom, Professor Tom Calma is a patron for the Churchill Trust. And thank you so much for joining us, Uncle Tom. And I'm just wondering if you might have a couple of words for the team on here around the fellowship, and any tips and hints that you've got from your end that might help with their application.
Yeah, thank you, Shona, and hi everybody, and apologies that I got on a bit late. I was on another Zoom. It's been my day today. I've had 4, and but it was an interesting one because it's on the Council of Elders for Aged Care, and that's something that you know, we all have to look forward to. And so if there's any aspirants who want to do some overseas look at what's happening over there, that's another useful topic. I'm coming to you from Ngunnawal country, although I do hail from Darwin, Kungarakan on my mother's side and Iwiji on my father's side. And I see Monica there, she's Kungarakan as well. my cousin. But look, as I'm co-patron, and it's only been a couple of years since we formed these patronships with Margaret White, who's a non-Indigenous lady who's a co-patron. I've not done a fellowship with Churchill, but long before most of you were born, I did the Aboriginal Overseas Study Award, and that was a government program back in 84, and it's life-changing. These opportunities are life-changing. To be able to get an opportunity to go and visit other countries and just learn from them, it will guide you and if not directly, but indirectly throughout your life, because you'll continually relate back to them and the experiences you've had. As Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, there's no obligation that your study is about Aboriginal affairs. It can be anything, as has been mentioned a number of times. And, you know, that's equally important for us and our development, that we do look at, you know, other affairs outside of Indigenous affairs. So, you know, that's important. I think, you know, between Shona, Michelle and Robin have covered off on most of all the big things. I want to mention two other things, really. I'll probably do more than two. One is that you know, the fellowships now, we're looking at a domestic fellowship program where people from remote and very remote communities can come into within Australia and have a look at how things happen, you know, in the big smoke, you know, which is equally important. So have a think about that. Also, to encourage any of your, you know, your friends and relations, and to remember that there's also support if you happen to have a disability and you need to have a chaperone. There's you know, there's potential for that to take place within the program. But the other really important one that we just started, and Robin, Shona and Michelle are involved in this, is that we're forming a network of alumni, and it's really in its formative period. But since the program started, we know of, we think, between 57 and 60 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have participated on a Churchill Fellowship, which is pretty big, and numbers. Some of them we know have passed, and but we haven't kept really good contact. And so, you know, what we need to do is to really form this cohort as we're doing now, so that the other fellows can come and assist you guys as new aspirants to the program and help guide you. And everybody on the panel today's expressed an interest, you know, to get others through the process. Our objective is to get as many people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, as possible on these programs. The other element to it is that there's been many non-Indigenous Australians who have studied Indigenous topics internationally and have come back. Some are able to put it into practice, but we haven't been organised enough to be able to capture that and really capitalise on that in our advancement. So things like, you know, that we even had preliminary talks about is how do we make sure that at the conclusion of your studies, you get back to Australia. That's not the end of it. It's how do we capitalise on that? How do we get you exposure out in to help progress, you know, the topic you studied? And it could be through that, you know, 4,000 odd people. You'd be sure that there's a network of non-Indigenous people who are in the right places that can assist with this program. So look, we're, I think, at a really important and exciting time with Churchill Fellowships, and you know, as has been encouraged, really, and I wish you well in your applications. Don't leave it until the last minute, and take advice from, you know, these wonderful former, well, they're not former, they're fellows now, and you know, we can learn a lot from them. So all the best on that.
Thank you, Uncle Tom. And, you know, they are really good pieces of advice, and we're change makers. We always have been, and we always will be, you know, in this space. Is there any, we're coming to the end, and now's the opportunity for us to be put on the spot, I suppose. Have you got any questions that you might want to ask, you know, Uncle Tom, Michelle, Robin, Adam, or myself about any burning things that you have about the fellowship that might help you with the application, or focus anything in around the fellowships at all? Feel free just to unmute and talk. We've got a smallish group tonight. No, that's certainly okay if you don't. We have certainly the capacity to answer outside of the session anyway. But Adam, is there anything?
Well, look, I think thank you to Michelle and to Robin and to you, Shona, and to Tom. Like you didn't put a foot wrong. You said so many things that were correct that I just say, yes, that is all very true. You know, I really encourage anyone who's thinking about applying to start an application. You know, go online and just start it, because you can come back to it, but it'll help you, you know, refine. You look at the questions, think about it. As Tom said, you know, talk to our alumni of Churchill Fellows who give you some advice if you want. Call the office, email us if you want to. We're always happy to answer your questions. If anyone online now is thinking about, if you live in remote or very remote Australia, you're thinking about that domestic opportunity, let us know. It is hot off the press. It is new. It's exciting. Our form doesn't even have a box to tick to say that's what you're doing, but you can put the destinations in the itinerary. Just put something in there like, oh, I'm looking for domestic travel. We'll work it out, but, you know, give us a call so we can keep an eye out for it. And let other people know. You know, if you know someone who you think would make a great Churchill Fellow, this is the beauty of the fellowships, is the network of people. Tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, have a crack. So.
Can also just add, I'm not sure that we've talked very much about it, but one of the other new initiatives is around the impact funding that's available, so that for some of us, the big ideas that we get from the Churchill and the things we want to implement are hindered by resourcing. So now that there's also another element of that in the application, so that's a really good way to start thinking about how you put into practice some of this stuff. And even the dissemination of your information to people is really important. Like, how will you do that? What networks can support it? And do you need to kind of, you know, create some opportunities for you as a result of that funding?
Thanks, Michelle. Adam,
sorry,
Emma, go for it. Go for it, Emma.
Do you have a question? Sorry, I just noticed that it was recorded and I missed the beginning. I was in another meeting and I missed the beginning a bit, Shona, that you had spoken about. Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to Michelle, Robin and Tom for sharing, and also Adam, your insights on the application process and the tips you've given. But yeah, will we have access to the recording of what you've done previously? Sorry.
Adam?
Yeah, look, that's our intention. We weren't quite sure when we started tonight. Should we record it? Shouldn't we? We had a chat about it. We went, yeah, let's record it. We will make it available. We haven't sort of worked out the best way to do that yet. So can I just say, in lieu of any other smart idea we have, just get in touch with us and say, hey, can we get that recording? And that's probably the quickest way to get it. And we'll work it out from there.
Oh, that's amazing. If there's no other, thank you for, you know, coming on, spending the last, I don't know, 45 minutes with us. It is a privilege to do so, and to hear from everybody and see some faces. So it's great. And it is a great opportunity. Like Adam said, get on there, open up the application, and the inspiration tends to flow from there. And I'm excited to hear, Robin, that you're on the ACT selection panel. So you'll have some friendly faces on your panels. My face tries to be friendly most of the time. You know, I've got lots of kids, so, you know, I have to get out of the grumpy mum mode. But, you know, there is more First Nations people sitting on selection panels than ever before, and it's a great opportunity to find some friendly faces in those interviews and you know, you're not alone, and it's a great opportunity, and I just encourage you to get onto it. So thanks so much for coming on board, everybody, and have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing your applications when they come through.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.